Hi everyone, this is John-Paul Sansone at Appleby & Company here in Fresno. What we're going to look at now is an ROI tool, and this is something that we use quite often with clients, especially when we're first engaging with them and really want to convey the value that a solution like this has. But basically it's a pretty simple, straightforward spreadsheet. As you can see on the bottom here, I'm not going to go into too much detail on what each aspect is right now, but there's basically a few tabs. So one would be the pre-deployment costs. That's where, when we're engaging with the client, a lot of the information that we look to gather is sort of provided from the client. So items related to the average salary of their staff, how much time they're spending on different processes, how much time they're spending on storage and shipping information around, etc. And then there's obviously the investment cost tab, which we'll show in a second, post-deployment costs, which are more or less establishing a threshold on a best case and a worst case scenario, and then actually looking at the ROI calculation itself. So again, we use this tool pretty often. It's very helpful, and I'm going to kind of just go through this example. This is actually what we did with a client recently. Some of the numbers actually might still be in here, but I think the end result is really interesting because it just shows how powerful something like this can be for an organization. So starting out here, there's actually 4 sections on this first tab. There's the monthly labor costs, the monthly storage costs, the monthly copying costs, and the monthly distribution costs. So if we actually start at the top left, you see there's kind of 2 sections. So one is all the labor costs regarding electronic content and how that's administered, and then on the right hand side here, the costs for paper content administration. And in this case, this client had a lot more people dedicated to dealing with the physical paper. This was an organization looking to go a little bit more paperless or paper light in their office, and while they had some people that were responsible for electronic content in terms of storing information, retrieving files, you can really see that on the right hand side, that's really where all their time was being spent. There's an item here, the second line item, showing the actual hourly salary of staff, and then more importantly the items below, so showing the time spent retrieving paper content or electronic content, sorting through documents, recreating electronic content that has been deleted or can't be located. So all that time when something does get lost, misplaced, misfiled, and you have to recreate it, what that time is like. And then time spent, finally on the last line here, faxing information. So what's really interesting is that on the right hand side, this organization, they really were spending about 4 to 5 hours per staff member around these paper processes. And yeah, these individuals might be solely responsible for filing the paperwork or retrieving it. That might be their actual day-to-day 9-to-5 job, but you really can see the overall cost and the impact that it's having on the organization. So just this comparison alone, spending $4,200 a month on electronic content versus an incredible $46,000 on how their paper content is administered and maintained. So really just incredible numbers right there. And again, the calculations are being done on this tab here, this hidden calculations tab. Going on to section 2, the monthly storage costs. For them, they had quite a lot of on-site file cabinets and actual physical storage across their, I think, 3 or 4 locations here in California. And they said they had about 1,000 or so square feet. This is more or less the cost that they were spending on that, as you can see here. But again, this is a really useful item to take into account, because if you no longer have to store information on site in your filing cabinets, or even in most cases off site, I think that's where a lot of the costs are as well, whether it's an Iron Mountain, whether it's some off-site warehouse that you're paying someone to rent out, and then not only that, but you have to then pay staff possibly to go to that warehouse, search through the information, drive it back over to your main office. I mean, there's really a lot of time spent accessing that information itself. And again, that's kind of where the item here is. Hours spent accessing offsite storage per user per month, 16 hours. So the monthly storage costs, again, it's no surprise that the on-site storage costs were about $1,500, while the total off-site storage costs were about $3,100. So again, a monthly cost of about $4,500 just on the storage side of things. And then finally, section 3 and 4, copying costs. This is roughly how many pages they were generating each day across their many locations, and relatively what that cost was. And then on the distribution side, how many faxes they were sending a day, the cost of faxing it, if there's any overnight delivery services, a FedEx, a UPS, a US Post Office service, roughly what that cost is. So when you take all this into account, you get a pretty high cost per month being spent on their current processes, or this pre-deployment cost. And in this case, what we had put together, this was an example where I think they had about 20 to 30 people or so involved with the process. And again, these costs are not going to be entirely accurate for your scenario, but in their case, roughly, they were looking at an initial investment, the software cost of about $30,000. The support or annual maintenance cost was about $6,000 for this application, meaning that their year 2 cost is only roughly $6,000. So really, this is their initial investment, or the initial capital expenditure, about $36,000 total. And what we then asked them, or provided, was basically a best case scenario of having 50% of their staff, involved with these processes, or meeting these processes. So that being the best case scenario, meaning that, if the time spent retrieving electronic content right now is 30 minutes per user per day, as we can see by this item here, we're saying that in a best case scenario, we're going to shave that to just 15. In a worst case scenario, we're going to shave that to just 25%. So it's kind of interesting. You can definitely play around with these numbers. If you're more confident that the solution will be widely accepted by others in the organization, you could set that at 75 maybe. If you're less confident, you can obviously go lower. And then a worst case scenario, that might be less than 25. But really, you always want to make sure when you're implementing technology and recommending it especially, that staff and end users and those that it's intended for are actually going to be using it. You're not just recommending it or implementing it for technology's sake. You want to make sure that it's a tool that's going to be helpful and used by everyone. So in this case, we just said a 50% best case scenario and a 25% worst case scenario. And we more or less uniformly put those across each of these line items. So the monthly storage costs, the copying, distribution costs. And what that did is basically, on the following tab, output the following graph and information. So we are seeing that right now, in the best case scenario, from a labor cost standpoint alone, we can save up to $25,000. Best case scenario storage costs, we can save $2,200. Copying costs $220, distribution costs $737. So the total monthly cost savings in this best case scenario is a little over $28,000. While in the worst case scenario, it's a little over $12,000. So even with that number as low as 25%, meaning that our goal is only to hit 25% of what we set out to do, we're still seeing a monthly cost savings of a little bit under $13,000. So what's really interesting in this example was that for that very low, very, very low initial investment of just $36,000, the annualized cost savings, or the ROI in this case, in the best case scenario, which was at that 50% threshold, was $345,000. That's just in the first year, right? And the ROI in this case, from a percentage standpoint, is 858%. And the worst case was 332%. So while these numbers might not be entirely accurate, and I even kind of did a double take myself looking at them, I went back to the client, I said, are these numbers accurate? Is this the best case scenario of what you see going on? They said it was. So really, this is, to a degree, the type of savings, the type of ROI that can be achieved through document management, through enterprise content management solutions today. And really, this tool is available to yourself. We really want to be helpful in working with you and making the best case possible for why technology should be in the organization, for why it should be one of the more helpful tools that you and your staff have available. And I think when we're actually looking at this whole paperless versus paper realm out there, and the argument going back and forth, you're really never going to be 100% paperless. But as you can see in this case here, even at a 50% threshold, even getting just 50% of the results that we were looking for, we're still saving $28,000 a month. And almost, if you want to estimate on the high end, nearly $500,000 a year just by making some of these changes. So again, this is John-Paul Sansone at Appleby. I know this has been a long video, but we appreciate you sticking through. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about how these numbers were reached. And really, we're here to help you. We want to work closely with you to figure out some sort of ROI analysis for you as well. And again, we can answer any questions related to document, content management, records management, or business process automation. All right, take care.